Alrighty. So RJ contacted me about, around about a month ago or so and said that somebody, it sounds like it's Greg, who had instigated this topic for the evening, looking for some information on ham radio DX clusters. Why do we care about them? What do we use them for? And, what do we get out of them? So I have actually been running a DX cluster out of my house here since 2014. And so I have a little bit of experience on the sysop side of things. And I had used DX clusters in the years prior to that. I feel it's kind of a useful resource, especially if you're looking for stations that you're having trouble finding otherwise out there. So we'll go through a little bit of the ins and outs of what is a cluster and what is the history of these clusters. So a DX cluster is essentially a network of computers that are running a common software package, or nowadays it's a set of a couple of different packages that you can pick from, and they're dedicated to gathering and disseminating information on DX stations, long distance contacts. That's the main purpose. They've kind of evolved into a couple of other side purposes these days, for the better or for the worse, depending on who you ask. But we'll kind of look at the roots of where did this all come from, and why is it how it is today. So the history of the DX clusters, originally this came about as a DOS program from a ham Alpha Kilo 1 Alpha back in the 80s. Think about what was going on in the 80s. We really didn't have the World Wide Web as we know it today. I mean, Milnet was there, and some of the colleges had the framework of what became the internet, but we really had no easy means of communication, computer to computer. And from a ham radio standpoint, people are innovators and they want to have a way to solve problems, and they had come up with packet radio, and the nodes that were being developed for packet radio could connect from one to another. You had rudimentary email. I don't even think it was actually referred to as email back in the day, but you could pass a message from one person to another, and it would pass from node to node. And they kind of relied on this technology of those separate nodes to interconnect and form a network of software that talk to one another, that a station on node A could spot a DX station, could post that, hey, I'm working this station in South Africa, and a station on node B, C, D, E would see that posting in as quick of real time as packet radio would allow. So these nodes, the end users for the most part were accessing them at the blazing fast speed of 1200 baud, and the backbone was running on things like 9600 baud, and passing the messages between. And the packet cluster nodes supported a couple of different forms of networking: AX25, ROS, NetROM, TCP/IP. Again, what developed into what we know of as the internet nowadays. So that brings us forward to today. The vast majority of DX clusters, from what we see, are not really accessed via packet anymore, although there are still a few. A lot of them are telnet based and web based, so it may actually be like a web page that you get to, or it may be a telnet site that you go to access the cluster. A lot of them are hosted on Linux. Linux as an operating system is great for the ham radio operators that like to tinker, to experiment with things. And there's, from the groundwork that the Alpha Kilo 1 Alpha station had put together with the original cluster software, it's now kind of broken up into several different programs that run these nodes, most popular of which are the AR cluster, the CC cluster, and DX Spider. The DX Spider is what I happen to run here. I do believe that at least one of those other two clusters will run on a Windows-based system. But DX Spider I have running on a Linux machine, and it's been continuously operating for ever since 2014 with relatively low maintenance on my part. So DX Spider was created by a ham from Great Britain, Golf 1 Tango Lima Hotel, Dirk, and he's still very active, very responsive to questions, concerns that the sysops have, or new developments. He's still actively maintaining and updating the software. Even as updated and all this additional functionality that he's added over the years, it's still, if you put it side by side, tied it into a old node that was running the Alpha Kilo 1 Alpha, they would still talk. So if you recreated one of these older ones, you could plug it right into the network that is there today, and it would still function. It would still pass traffic from one node to another. So we'll kind of go in. A lot of the presentation today is going to be me walking through commands and showing you what you can do with the cluster from the telnet side of things. And we'll eventually get into that there's a lot of logging programs that access clusters automatically, and there's some nice things that they do. But the power, my personal opinion, the power of these clusters is best shown, through telnet. And that's how the clusters were originally designed to be accessed, not as a GUI, but to be accessed as a text-based system. So what I have running on the right side of the screen here is Putty or however you want to pronounce it. It's just a Windows program that allows you to do either secure shell or telnet. So I have it actually listed here, and that's going to link right up to my cluster downstairs. So I'll bring this window over and get it out of the way for you. So I'm going to log in here, as a station that, probably has not logged into my cluster before. Who should we pick on? We'll try RJ. All right. So I don't know if everybody can see that, but we're connected into the N2WLS 5 cluster, which is running out of a computer in my basement. When you first log in to the cluster, never having been on there before, it's going to give you a couple of suggestions. So it's going to tell you that you should probably set your name on the cluster. You should probably set your location, set up your home node. So if we wanted to type this stuff in, we could do set/name RJ. Your name is now RJ. We can do set/QRA. RJ, what's your what, Delta November 71? What's the rest of it?
Japan Alpha.
Japan Alpha. Okay. You'll notice too, the Putty program, a DX posting came in while I was in the middle of typing that, so it does actually kind of overwrite my line, but the input buffer still takes everything that I'm typing. And unfortunately, with Putty, there's no easy way for me to eliminate that, which kind of takes a little bit from the demonstration here. But this time of day, there shouldn't be a whole ton of posts on the cluster. So, as you put this information in, that'll stay within the system. So the next time RJ logs in, it may tell him he needs to set his QTH, but his name and his QRA are going to be in there. It may tell him that he needs to set his home node. Some of the DX clusters require registration. So that's what this message of the day is that's posted up on here. So if a new user comes on and they want to be able to post DX spots up to my cluster, they need to send me an email and request the ability to do that. And I can also actually set them up with a password as well if they want to protect their account so that nobody else can access it. Generally, the cluster system is fairly trusting. So there are a lot of clusters that you could log into and throw any call sign in there and pretend to be that user, which is a little bit of a downfall of the system. And even as recently as I think it was last year, we had sysops were blocking a couple of stations that were posting false spots. It is something that you can kind of eliminate a little bit by requiring the registration from the sysop side of things. So we'll go back down here, and I just want to show all of the stuff that I'm putting on the PowerPoint. The meat and potatoes of it, I'll send to RJ as an outline so that he can send to you guys, so you don't have to worry about copying any of this stuff down. These examples will be there, and you'll be able to have it as a reference after this presentation. So the name was fairly self-explanatory. The QRA was fairly self-explanatory. The format for the location, this is what the system is looking for. If you go to put in your Latin long, that's basically how it wants it to be in the system. When you go to log back in the next time, like I said, that any of those questions that you answered, that the system retains it, so you don't have to worry about typing it in each time. And you'll notice as I'm talking here on the bottom of the cluster, we're starting to see DX spots coming in. These happen the whole time you're connected. So I've got some examples of the different formatting that you may see. So DX from and a call sign. So this indicates that this is the station that made the spot. The frequencies, you'll notice the formatting. This is a 6-meter frequency. These are 40 meters. That's an 80 meter down here. That's, again, what the system's going to look for if you're manually typing in a DX spot. When you have this tied to your logging software to automatically spot stations, you don't have to worry about that. The spotting software, or the logging software rather, will format the spots automatically for you. So the next thing that we see on the DX spot is the call sign that they're spotting. So this November 5 station has put a spot of a 6-meter contact with X-ray Echo 2 Bravo Sierra Tango. And it's showing that it was in Echo Mary 12 for the grid square. And then the time of the posting and the end of the DX spot, you do have some control. There are some settings that you can change as to whether or not the grid square of the poster is showing or not in the spots. You can see that there's an FT8 contact here. So they actually put in, for any of you that have worked FT8, the 40-meter frequency is 7074, but then everybody branches off and uses, various spots on the waterfall. And this actually, whoever had posted this, the Sugar Papa 5 station there, his logging software actually was taking, all the way down to how many hertz off of that 7074 the station was, and posting it right to the cluster. This one, I'll call your attention to, Whiskey 3 Lima Papa Lima, is a station that is feeding data to the clusters at a fairly limited pace. We may see some of them pop up on the live feed from the cluster here throughout the evening, but they have a set of remote receivers in various locations, and it's mostly skimming for CW stations. You may have heard of things like Reverse Beacon Network and CW Skimmer. The volume of data that comes from those would overwhelm the cluster. But we do have a couple of stations like this Whiskey 3 Lima Papa Lima that feed data to the clusters that are tolerable. And if somebody doesn't want to see it, there are filters that you can turn on the cluster that would block some of that information. And we'll touch on that a little bit later in the presentation. But you can see this information on the cluster on the telnet session here as we've been chatting. These stations have all been spotting live stuff that should be on the air as we speak. So there's a couple of FT8 contacts in here. We've got a Uniform Alpha 9, that's what, Ukrainian station. You got to keep in mind, though, when you're looking at the cluster, where is the spot originating from? So, in the United States, in New York State, do I necessarily care that a Sugar Papa 5 station is able to hear or work a station in Uniform Alpha 9? So, keep things like that in mind as we go further on in the slides, that there are some filters that you can install. And if I was to log out of RJ here and log into my own account, I have a filter that I run that limits it to DX postings from United States stations and Canadian stations, and that's it. So I won't see on my login the European posts. I won't see even the Mexican posts. I just want ones that are coming from spots from stations in the U.S. and Canada. And you can do that. You can drill this stuff down to get to that level of restriction of details. Any questions thus far? I mean, feel free to interrupt if you've got anything, and we'll keep walking through here. Hearing no questions, I'm going to actually exit out of RJ's login. I'm going to go into another login that has all the proper locators in there and the lat and longitudes. Bear with me a second while I do this. We're going to pull up W2SO, which is the club call for the Lancaster, New York Amateur Radio Club that I'm associated with. And I've pre-built all of their information in here, so that'll make things a little bit easier on some of the upcoming slides. All right, so we'll go through some basic commands. Most things when you type into the cluster can be abbreviated. If I was to go on here and just type in help, it's semi-helpful. There is a basic help function, but you need to know some of the commands to be able to request help with them. So there is it says look at the apropos string command. So if I wanted to search for the word DX out of all of the commands that are out there, if I type in apropos DX, it'll send me a help screen with all of the commands that are for the word DX. So looking at the presentation, we're going to do a show /DX. As I type that into the cluster and hit enter, that will give me the most recent 10 DX spots. And you can abbreviate. So show, you can abbreviate SH. So if I type in SH/DX, I'll get the same thing. You can append a number onto that command. So if I wanted to see the last 20 DX spots that are saved in the cluster, if I type in the 20, I get 20 of them. If I want to narrow this down to the 40 meter band, we'll do show DX 20 on 40 meters. And now that's just showing over here contacts or spots that are on the 40 meter band. If I wanted to look at and this will drill back in the history, which the cluster saves quite some time back. If I want to see, I know I have W2SO on the side here, but let's look at RJ. So we'll do show DX Whiskey Yankee 7 Alpha Alpha. It'll take a few seconds here to think. Feel free to whistle the Jeopardy theme song as it does this. We'll see if RJ's been active at all recently here. Hey, look at that. So we've got contacts from December 17th, which was a POTA activation, so Parks on the Air. So this is basically RJ running a POTA station at, I don't even know what Park Kilo 3295 is. I'm sure RJ does.
Yeah,
Um, Okay. You were spotted by November 1 Whiskey Delta. So, right around 2122 Zulu that day, you may have had an uptick in contacts because you got spotted on the DX cluster if people were watching for parks on the air. And actually a lot of, it looks like the majority of your stuff here is all POTA activations. Um, but if, so this is showing somebody in the group here. What if we want to see, has the South Pole been on the air recently? That's what, Kilo Charlie for Alpha 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 is the pole, RJ?
correct.
All right, so we've got January 23rd at 117, 14243 is the pole frequency, or the Antarctic frequency, I should say. So, they've been active somewhat recently here. You can see the dates and the times and who's spotting them and where. So if you're looking for a particular station, you can throw a couple of commands into the cluster and see who's been active when. Um, you can limit it by band. So I got the example on there, show DX on VHF. So there's anything that's been, the last 10 spots that have come in on VHF. If we're looking for a particular DXCC entity, so I'm going to do show slash DXCC. We'll do Sugar Papa 9, look for my ancestors back in Poland. And here's a whole bunch of, Sugar Papa. It doesn't, it looks like there's some sixes and some threes in there, so it may not give you exactly just the Sugar Papa 9, but it's giving you the DXCC entity of Sugar Papa, it looks like. Um, so you can kind of drill down, what information you want to find. Flip slides here.
Hey, Gary.
Yeah.
Um, so far, I understand all the DX spots in foreign countries and people chasing grid squares and all that sort of thing. And then
Mm-hmm.
the example with RJ with somebody spotted him because it was a POTA, another special event sort of thing. What about Joe Ham talking to Jim Ham across town? Does anybody, I mean, is it just for DX? Would make more sense. Um,
So, like everything else, computer and network, garbage in, garbage out. So, um, most of the logging software that's out there that I've seen, and my closest experience is with the N3FJP programs, and we use N1MM quite a bit for contesting. You do have a ability to spot everything automatically, which if you're working people around the corner, it may not be worthwhile to everybody else on the DX cluster to care about it, but there are stations that do that. Now, mind you, if I will use the example of like the New York QSO party, if the DX cluster is alive with stations that are all working the New York QSO party, then the fact that I work the Bronx, the Bronx has been one of the counties that really has not been overly active on the New York QSO party. So if I happen to spot that, you're probably going to have 20 or 40 stations jump on that opportunity to work the Bronx. So it's all kind of relative to, are you in a contest or is this average day to day? For the FT8 context, there's a lot of people that are county hunting. There's a lot of people that are state hunting. They're working on their worked all states and DXCC. It may be worthwhile to spot things. There's also times where, unfortunately, stations, like I said before, post false reports to the clusters. And those are all unfortunate possibilities with this. Did that answer your question?
yep. Thank you.
Okay. All right. This part, this slide, I can't actually easily demonstrate here because I don't want to be one of those people that puts a false spot in, and I'm not actually sitting at my radio, I'm sitting at my kitchen. But the basic format for spotting DX to the cluster is what I have shown here. So typing in the initials DX, the frequency. So, again, keeping in mind the formatting, this would be a 20 meter contact at 14.243. The station that you're spotting, so this is the DX that you've heard, and then your remarks. If I was to type that in and push enter, it would go out to the entire cluster network. And you would also see it come back to you so that you know it actually successfully posted. Like I said, I won't demonstrate that because I don't want to give them any false publicity here. Go to the next slide. All right, announcements. So announcements are things that get posted to the clusters quite sporadically, but they don't necessarily involve a spot of a DX that's operating out there. So it could be a question. If I type in announce 6 meter sideband opening to Texas, that format here without the word full will announce to just my local node. So anybody that's connected to my node currently would see that announcement. If I put the word full in there, then that will go out across all the clusters in the entire network, which I don't know if my scroll back buffer here is, we'll go back all the way. There are currently, at the time of our login, 306 nodes connected. There's 3 users locally, so 2 other people are connected to my node right now. And there's 551 total users. In the 212 days that this has been running continuously on my server downstairs since the last upgrade or power outage or whatever took it out, there's been a max number of users of 8,775 people at once on the cluster. So if you're making an announcement to everybody, it better be good, worthwhile. In fact, I can actually, I think I have this on a future slide, but if I do show/announcement, yeah, so the last person posted something, looks like earlier today, recommending that Sugar X-Ray 5 Alpha change operators. Great. Did everybody in the cluster need to know that? Probably not, but you look and it's relatively sporadic that people are making announcements on there. All right. Let's see what I got next. So, I mentioned how many users are connected and, who's actually out there. So if I type in right now on here the word who and push enter, you can see who's actually or what is actually connected to my node currently. Hey, Doug's here. Look at this. He's already connected. So Doug's connected currently to the cluster. Kilo 2 Echo Yankee Sierra, I believe, is a station up in Orleans County north of me, who's connected. And then a lot of what the other entities are here are other nodes. So that is, a tenfold redundancy on my part, that if the connection to this Kilo 0 Delta India Victor drops out for some reason, I'm still connected to a whole bunch of other nodes. And we as sysops get postings. There's a mail serve where, new nodes, they need a data feed, so they need to connect to somebody to start with. And we'll see a new node pop up. And actually just a couple of weeks ago was this individual, November 5 Whiskey Lima Sierra -2, and I happen to be November 2 Whiskey Lima Sierra -5. So I kind of felt obligated to respond to that person and I'll give them a data feed from my node. That all happens on the backside of this. So if we wanted to look at just users that are connected on the presentation, I show /users, and that'll just show the user stations that are currently connected to my node. If we want to see what users are connected out on the network. And I believe this just shows one step away, so nodes that are connected to me. If I type in show/config, you can see anything that's, well, it looks like it's doing more than just one step away. It's doing pretty much anything US here, showing what nodes or what users are connected to the various nodes that are out on the US side of the DX cluster network. And then there's also a show/config/node, which is showing more data. So you kind of get the sense that there's a lot of nodes out there that are interconnected, that are still operating, that people are still using. And this is 80s technology, and it's still, functional, and it still serves a purpose today. All right. So some other interesting things that you can do, and a lot of these things are things that when you're connected to a cluster with your logging software, you don't have access to unless you were to go into the telnet window that is the means of the logging software connecting to the cluster. So if I wanted to look up some propagation information, if I type in, get into the proper window here, show/sun. So, like I said, we're connected as W2SO right now, which is our Lancaster, New York club. So it's showing me the sunrise, sunset times, and the current location of the sun, is showing over here. Same applies for the moon. Again, if somebody is doing EME, something like that, it also shows the illumination of the moon. You can also figure out beam headings. So if I want to work my ancestors, we'll do show heading Sugar Papa 9. And that's showing from the location of Whiskey 2 Sierra Oscar. It's going to be at a distance of 4,315 miles. It's going to be a heading of 46 degrees from us. Reciprocal heading, it shows, of 305 degrees from Poland back to here. And we can, if we don't know necessarily the DXCC entity, if we want to search based on their Maidenhead locator, if I do show/QRA, and we'll do Delta November 71 out in your direction. And that's showing, a beam heading from here of 275, or from you guys to me of 77, and then the distance between. So, if you're aiming a beam antenna and you need to know where to aim it, again, this information is available to you right on the cluster. Propagation, it does run, I don't think it's based on VOA cap. I think it's based on mini prop. I could be mistaken on that. But if we were to type in show MUF for maximum usable frequency for Sugar Papa 9 again, it's going to show us a 2-hour current window of what the current maximum usable frequency is if we were trying to contact a station in Poland. And it's giving us on 160, so that's the 1.8 here, S0, or if we're on 80 meters, 3.5, a S1 plus, so 1.5. So that would be, our best chance right now of working a Sugar Papa 9. And you can add a time factor on this. So I could do show MUF Sugar Papa 9, and we'll do 24 hours. And you can see here in the 1415 Zulu, we're getting out to, I'd have to scroll up to see, but it looks like an S2 probability or an S2 plus, depending on the time here, and that's going to be up on 30 meters or 20 meters, it looks like. So you can kind of do some quick propagation calculations. And if you want to know, what the solar conditions are, that's covered on the cluster as well. So show/WWV, and there's the most recent 5 postings of the solar geophysical data from WWV. Or there's I think it's a German equivalent if you do show/WCY, and this one usually is reported a little bit more frequently to the cluster, but it's giving you the A index, the K index, the storm. Looks like it's quiet currently. Again, data to help with your ability to predict if you're going to be able to talk to another station across the world. Satellites. I knew RJ would be here, and I figured Doug would probably be here, so I kind of had to build a slide for satellites. The cluster doesn't have a ton of satellite stuff, but it does actually, the way I've got mine set up, it does auto update the CEPs and stuff like that. If we want to get a list of what satellites are in here, if I type in the command show/sat, you'll see that there's a whole bunch of them. The number after the satellite name is the number of days since the CEPs were updated, which basically tells where the satellite is in the sky. So some of these satellites that are in here, you're seeing, last updated 2,295 days ago. I'm assuming RS-39 is no longer being tracked, or nobody cares about it, or it's burned up, or it's not a current satellite. But things like RS-44, I believe my CEPs update once a week. So it's got 5 days, and it'll eventually get to 6 days and then reset to 0 as the DX cluster updates itself. So if we want to look at when our upcoming passes are for RS-44, I'm going to do show/sat, and we'll put in RS-44. So that's showing the current location, and there's no passes of RS-44 coming by me within the next 3 hours. So we can give it a little bit of a longer time frame. So I could do show/sat RS-44. We'll do it a duration of 24 hours at an interval of 5 minutes. And that'll at least give us some past data to look at. So it's giving us the UTC date, the UTC time, the lat longitude. Longitude's kind of strange because it's not east and west. It's, we have a longitude of 316.2, and it's visible here. So apparently we're wrapping around the globe to get this data. The altitude of the sat, the azimuth and elevation data, and the distance of the satellite from us. So you can actually even find some use to this if you don't have an app for satellite tracking, and you want to see, you want to do some predictions as to when you're going to be able to see a specific satellite. A lot of the stuff that we do with satellites now is kind of taken care of by cell phone apps and other tracking software, so a little bit less useful. But like I said, RJ and Doug are here, so I had to include it for them. All right, call book data. So show/QRZ, put in RJ's call here. Give it a second to think, and then boom, we've got all of his information. The USDB, so for cluster sysops that don't pay for the QRZ data, the USDB is freely downloadable to them, and it only gives us a city and state. So if I plug in show USDB, and again, we'll use RJ, it gives his city and state. And then Whiskey Mike 7 Delta is another call book system that's built in here. And that's pulling data from, I believe, actually, I'm not sure if that's directly from FCC or somewhere else. Let's see, Whiskey Yankee 7 Alpha Alpha. I would assume it's pulling from FCC because it's got his issued and expired dates and stuff like that, and shows his old call sign and previous class. Again, if you need to quickly figure out where to send that QSL card, Cluster can help with that. So filtering, I had mentioned before, and it is a way of boiling down the data that's coming through the cluster to more useful information to you. Again, I'll use the example of the New York QSO party. The only thing that we may care about when we're working the QSO party is counties within New York State. So you could, by putting in a couple of filter commands, boil it down to just seeing cluster posts of other Whiskey 2, Kilo 2, November 2, anybody that's coming from New York State. And I won't, the filtering gets to be pretty lengthy and there's a lot of different inputs to it. It's an entire manual that walks you to put filters in. And I have a link at the end of the presentation, and that'll definitely be in the outline that I send to RJ to get to you guys. I do put in the comment here though that like on my login, I always run the accept spots one by DXCC, Whiskey, and Victor Echo. So what that means is I'm only going to see spots that are posted by people in the United States and Canada. So that cuts out the, like I showed before, a Sugar Papa 5 station that's spotting somebody in the Ukraine. I may not hear the Ukraine like he does, but if somebody in New York State or somebody in Canada spots that station, there's a better chance that I'm going to hear them. Any questions on that? All right. So if I wanted to disconnect from the cluster, I would type in the word bye or the word exit, and that will break the connection to the cluster. I also run, I kind of built on top of the cluster a web interface. It doesn't per se interact from the web to the cluster, but it takes the data that's coming through my cluster and puts it on a web page. So if you were to go to this website in your web browser, and I'll click on it here, give it a second to load up, you will actually see a status board like display of what's coming through my cluster. And we kind of make use of this, times like field day. I may put this up on a screen so that, we can see if there's any interesting stations coming through. If you're looking for somebody, or if you're, again, the example of the QSO party, if we're looking for the Bronx and somebody keeps an eye on this, in front of the operating positions, and, somebody spots the Bronx, then you can just jump on it. Even if your logging software isn't tied to the cluster, you can see the data that's coming through. And this auto loads, auto updates. I forget if it's on a 30-second or a 1-minute interval, but you'll see new data post. These are links to the call signs. I had to disable it because when I first built this, somebody was actually kind of using that as a backdoor way of doing QRZ lookups. So I took that ability away from them. If I'm inside the building here and accessing this web page just on the local area network, which I'm not going to type in here, if I click on any of these, it brings me up their QRZ data for the station. So this is available. This is always running. Anybody can attach to this. I don't per se track, and like we do on the cluster, as to who's connected to it. But I have gotten comments from people over the years as to, hey, how did you do that? How, it's kind of neat to have that display, and I've kind of disseminated that out to some other ham stations.
Is that what we use to hook up to, like, that's how I got my spotting cluster connected to you for my N3FJP? Is that correct?
So from N3FJP, you would have probably plugged in this information at the top, the dxc.n2ws.com and the port 7300. and that would be a telnet connection, usually from the logging software to the cluster. So what RJ is referring to is on N3FJP, usually at the bottom of your logging window, you'll get what looks like a little spreadsheet with 4 or 5 lines, and it's showing the spots coming through the cluster. It looks very similar to this, albeit a little bit smaller and blue and white. Not as multicolored as this. But yeah, that's essentially how that data comes in. It's coming on Telnet. It's not coming from the website side of this. All right, let me exit out of this screen here. All right, and that was a good segue from RJ. A lot of the logging programs that are out there will interface directly to the clusters. They will allow that automatic spotting that we talked about before, for better or for worse. Again, if you're spotting that you're talking to your next door neighbor, who cares? But if you're spotting that you're talking to, Liechtenstein or some other smaller DX entity, good. We need that information. A lot of times the programs will display the tabular format, which is what the N3FJP that we had just talked about shows. N1MM, especially like when you're doing a contest, will show you almost like a frequency wheel with spots on it. And even as you, if you've got cat control enabled, as you turn the wheel on your radio and spin up and down a frequency, if a spot has come in to N1MM, you can have it set up so that it'll predict who's on that frequency as you're spinning through. Or if a spot comes through and you want to quickly QSY to that frequency, one click on it on the frequency display or the spot display will take you right to that station. It'll preload their information, their call sign, into the logging software. You're at the next field, you work them, you type in the 5 nines and hit enter, and done. It helps speed things up quite a bit during contests. In addition to the logging programs, there are a handful of standalone programs out there. There's cell phone apps that connect into the clusters. I can show you one here. So this is CC user here. And actually, shrink this down a little bit. So we're going to connect in. It's going to connect to my cluster, and you're going to see if it pulled in. Hold on one second. There we go. So it automatically pulled in the last pool of DX spots into this program. If I want to create a filter, there's a relatively easy means of creating a filter. It will ask the cluster for what your current filters are, or whatever you set this to. If you want to tell the cluster to set that as your filter, you can kind of build the filters pretty easily here. Again, New York stations. So if I wanted to just look for passing New York stations and rejecting everything else, I can set that up, build that on this program and save it to the cluster and use that for the contest, and then wipe it out when I'm done. Or if I'm just looking for specific bands that I want to be displayed. This still has, so if I want to get the most recent WWV data, it'll pull it in. Or if I want to get the sunrise, sunset, it'll pull that in over here. If I want to see what the most recent announcements are, it'll pull that in. So it's just a GUI front end to doing, some of the stuff that we just did on the telnet session. So it kind of takes away you having to remember commands, but you actually lose some of the power of the cluster. And I'm a firm believer in the telnet as the means of connecting to it. That was the original recommended means of doing all of this. exit out of that here. All right. So I had touched on the skimmers and the reverse beacon network. You know, there are some clusters that you may find out there that will have two nodes running, one that has the skimmer data and one that doesn't, and the volume of that data is really intense, and it kind of clouds what's really the purpose of the cluster. So skimmers is basically a software that's running that's listening to a segment of a band, and it is stealing you know, the what's coming across that band. So if you're listening to the lower end of 40 meters, and it automatically is listening to all the CW transmissions that are happening, it will start posting that, hey, you know, Whiskey Yankee 7 Alpha Alpha is on, you know, 7.047 and sending CW at 15 words per minute, and it automatically just keeps logging that information. Every time, you know, a station sends CQ, it posts that as a spot on the clusters, actually on this reverse beacon network. And you know, it's technology. It's, you know, so if you're really looking for a specific station, that data is there, but again, it wasn't the original intent of the cluster, and it you know, kind of overwhelms things. You know, as we're sitting here connected, you can see this was two posts over here at the same time, 0248 Zulu, from the same station, Z Lima 2, of two different Japanese stations on FT8. So I'm assuming this is some sort of a skimmer that is running. Again, you know, kind of like that example of the W3LPL that I had mentioned before. You know, it's low bandwidth. It's not putting out the amount of data that the reverse beacon network has coming through it. So this is tolerable compared to what would be, you know, we wouldn't be able to type any commands in. The screen would just be continuously scrolling if I had reverse beacon network turned on this. Questions on that at all? All right, last slide. You guys have survived an hour with me here. References. These are both pertinent to the DX Spider, which is the system that I use. I'm sure there's other manuals that are out there for the AR cluster and CC cluster. These links will take you to a web page with the user manual, which kind of runs through a lot of the same information that we went through. The second one is the one that I promised about filters. So that walks you through how to reject spots based on info or how to accept spots based on info. Here's the link for call state. So this is the example of, you know, Pennsylvania QSO party, or could very easily be switched to Wyoming, or you guys are what, 7 QP. You'd have to build in accepting spots from the represented states. You know, this walks you through how to implement all of that. This is a listing of telnet clusters that are out there. It's worldwide. So if we scroll down on here to United States, you can see all the clusters there. If you look on here, it tells you what you need to connect to on Telnet to get to them. Some of them show, like this has the CW skimmer as part of it. This is N6 Whiskey Sierra. His -2 has the skimmer. His -6 does not have the skimmer. So you'll see sometimes stations that run multiple clusters to cater to whichever, you know, set of data their users want, and it tells you what software the clusters are run on. I did mention, you know, packet originally. Let me see. Search on this. KN2M. So KN2M, which is still running a cluster, I don't know if his packet is still active, but back in the day, as spots would come across on 1200 baud on 145.03, it would transmit that DX spot. So I have a Kenwood TS2000 sitting in the basement, and anybody that's owned a 2000, there's actually a packet spotter function built into that radio. So I can have it sitting on 145.03, and on my display will come across the spots. You know, if KN2M is still transmitting on that frequency, you'll see the spots come across, and you can actually click a button on the 2000 and it'll QSY for you over to whatever that spot was useful back in the day. Nowadays with cat control, it's and the internet, it's a little bit less useful. And my info's in here along with everybody else's. And then this was just a text list of the clusters and their port numbers for connecting. Any questions? Anything that you guys want to go through? Anything that I didn't cover?
On that previous list you had up with the DX cluster info, one of the stations on there, in addition to packet frequencies, it listed APRS frequencies. Is the packets or the DX cluster information going out over APRS as well?
Offhand, I don't know. That's not something that I'm familiar with in Western New York, but it could very well be something that is being done. Let me see if I can. Maybe that was on that KN2M.
Yeah, down towards the bottom of the page. Yep, KB8PMY-3.
Yeah, and it's got the 14439. So
yep.
Hamilton. Oh, yeah, that's Hamilton, Ohio. That's a bit of a stretch from here. I wouldn't be hearing them. I don't know offhand. Again, yeah, it may be posting to APRS and in some way, shape, or form. Other questions?
If somebody posts on your site, N2WLS, either it would be through whatever program they're using, Telnet in, and here's this guy spotted. Does it show up? And you use the term nodes and cluster network. So that spot that's posted to your board, it shows up on other DX Summit or other clusters as well?
Yep.
All at the same time?
Yes. So like this entire list, assuming all of these stations on here are currently active in real time, that will propagate out across the entire network of all the DX clusters. And that's where, so like the example of that Sugar Papa 5 station that spotted the Uniform Alpha 9 early on in the presentation, he's not connected to my node. He's connected probably somewhere in Poland or anywhere in the world, and he's spotting that, and we're seeing it. When I let me give me a second to bring up my cluster here. Oops, I should give it a bye, and then I'm going to connect in as myself. Good, I turned echo off so you guys can't see my password. I'm going to do show/log N2WLS-5. So this is showing me the log of stations that are connected in, and it's not actually going back far enough here. This India Whiskey station is somebody that automatically connects multiple times a day to my cluster, just checking to see if it's up. But actually, when I looked earlier today, I had connections from a Charlie Tango 1 several times today that was using my cluster for their either telnet feed or their data feed to their logger. I've got, here's a Victor Alpha 3 station that was connected in, so a smattering of stations that are actively using it, and multiply that out across, all these other nodes that are out there. The number of users right now, the 1827 is relatively low, but you look at that during CQ worldwide, you may have, several thousand stations connected all at once.
So with the plethora of choices, what's the advantage of connect using N1MM, N3FJP, whatever, and connecting to one cluster versus another? Is there, why would anybody choose you over, I don't know, N9BC, just to pick somebody? How does a guy decide what cluster to use, Gary?
It, so I would say that the most logical choice would be if you want local posts close by. So if you have like in Western New York, we have a Western New York DX Association. Several of those guys connect to my cluster. It's a local cluster. They congregate there. They could send messages back and forth to one another. I didn't kind of go into that as part of the presentation. But there are advantages to multiple local stations using a local cluster. Why a Charlie Tango 1 is connecting to me, I don't know. I don't block it. It's fine. You can connect to any of these stations anywhere in the world. If you're working a Russian contest, might there be an advantage to you connecting to a Russian cluster? Might you get data faster from that cluster than it propagates out over the entire network of clusters? Possibly. So there may be different reasons for you to pick, one cluster over another. They're all ultimately connected.
So if there were, say there was a cluster based out of, well, Greg has a cluster, and all of us in this room used his cluster. When somebody got a spot, we, like when you had talked about messages, you can do it local or you can do all. You can piss off the whole world or local. If we all use Greg, I could say, hey, I just heard Gary on, and it would go out to the local whomever. Whereas if I was connected to you, when the Western New York DX Association is putting out messages, I would get that instead.
Technically speaking, stations that are locally connected should get the spot faster than it propagating out to all the other connected clusters. Technically speaking, I could run, my cluster and have it not connected to any other nodes. It could be just a local entity and serving just a local club. You lose out on all that other data that's out there. But you know, again, if you've got a DX association that's local and you just want to see what your guys are doing, have at it.
Can you search for a specific station? Like on an RBN, I can search, let me know if so and so's on, where he's at. Does the cluster provide that information if you wanted to know where ZL somebody was?
Yeah, so like if I let me exit out of mine here. Oops. Go back in as W2SO. All right, so I believe show/root. Let me N5WLS. Let me see. So he's currently not visible on the cluster.
Okay.
If you wanted to see which node a station is connected to, so if Doug went and connected to somebody else out there, I could do show/root N6UA. He's not currently connected. He had just signed out when I was logged in under myself there. But
Okay.
you can find somebody out there, and there is a chat function or a talk function. I have not used that recently. I'm assuming it's still working. There's actually mail functions on here, so
What,
you can send messages to one another through here.
what about the spot that just posted? Somebody's NP3V said he posted K9UIY. So if you
Yep.
wanted to search for him, would it find it?
The NP3V
No, it'd be the
shows.
K9, right?
No, the K9 is the station that's being spotted.
Right,
So
that's who I would be looking for.
so he's not going to be on the cluster.
Okay.
He's on the radio somewhere.
Right.
The November Papa 3 Victor. So if I do show route slash November Papa 3 Victor, hold on. No, of course now he's not connected. Lovely example.
Okay, I got you.
But there's nothing that says. So here's the next one down, the Alpha Charlie 6 Zulu Mike. He's on Alpha Echo 5 Echo, and that is routed to me through all these other points. That's how it gets to me. So if I wanted to send him a talk or a chat, I could, and assuming he's telnetted on and not connected through his logging software, we could technically chat back and forth on here. Other questions?
No, not until I get my N3 FJP hooked up, or I gotta get hooked up again, and at that point in time I'll have questions, because I'm really good at bugging you for that.
Yep, I'm here. You know how to get a hold of me. My email address will appear on the outline that I send to you guys. So if you do get any questions after the fact, feel free to shoot them to me in an email.
Sounds good. Well, thank you, Gary. Does anybody got anything they want to bring up? We can, open it up to anything. I don't know how long Gary's going to stick around, but you can pick his brain for a minute if you want, or just let us know.
Hey,
what's
Gary,
going
I got
on.
one question for you. When you're using N3FJP and say we wanted to use your cluster for spotting, you were talking about the filters. Is there any way in that program, or like say M1MM or whatever, to do that filtering so you only see what you need to see?
So it depends on the logging software. Each one is different. But the root of it is, if you can't build the filtering in your current logging software, there's nothing that prevents you from telnetting onto the cluster, building your filter, and leaving it. So the next time you connect from your logging software, unless it specifically disables your filter, that filter will still be active. So, and that's actually, again, I keep going to the example of the New York QSO party. That's what I do when we're doing a contest station at W2SO. I will telnet in, apply the filter before I leave the house in the morning, and we'll get to the clubhouse. And then when we connect N1MM over to it, that filter is already there and active. And the other stations don't know any different. They don't even know that there's a filter there, or they don't have to know the ins and outs of it because I've already enabled it.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, that answers my question. Kind of the same if I use like DX Watch or whatever, and I can add in filters, and it'll just show me what I want to show if I'm using that cluster.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
And there's several of us, and correct me if I'm wrong, I know Greg, Tom, myself use N3FJP, so if we get one of us set up, we might be able to get all of us set up.
Yep.
I've got N3FJP up now, and on the DX Spot setup, the Telnet host, dxspots.com, and it's filtering show DX, DX spots only. So there's some filtering in N3FJP itself to keep you from sending too much garbage.
Yeah, I just connected Ham Radio Deluxe to the N2WLS cluster while we were on this call, and I can do filtering in there too. I really appreciate it, Gary, because I've been trying to do DX clusters in HRD, and it turns out that I was just way overcomplicating it.
HRD is a big program, and it's kind of blossomed out in several different directions over the years. It even kind of scares me some.
And of course, just to be different, I'm using MacLogger DX. And I also made a bunch of comments in the chat. So I don't think anything that needs to be resolved there. But thanks, thanks for the presentation, Gary.
Oh, no problem at all. I'm just looking at your chat here and the comments on like the filtering. As a sysop, I could build in, mandatory filters, but my general approach is that's an end user thing. I want to present them as much data as possible, and what is or isn't important to me, may be, important or may not be to the end user. So, that's where I kind of leave that up to them. And, you had commented about filtering out the digital modes and spots. Um, you know, that end of things may not be important to you, but if somebody's working FT8, they want that information, they want it to come through.